Hello, everyone, and welcome back. Today, we're exploring a quiet kind of struggle that doesn't always look serious from the outside, but slowly reshapes how you feel, think, and exist within your own life. It's not loud, it's not obvious, but it's deeply real. And once you notice it, you can't unsee it. Most people believe mental exhaustion comes from overworking, too many responsibilities, endless screen time, or lack of sleep. And sometimes that's true, but there's another kind of exhaustion that feels different, almost harder to explain. You wake up tired even after resting. Conversations begin to feel heavy. Small problems carry a strange weight. Your mind rarely settles into silence. And the unsettling part is, on the surface, everything might seem perfectly fine. This is something deeply rooted in human psychology. The mind becomes exhausted not just from what you do, but from who you are trying to be. Not in the sense of deceiving others, but in the quiet, daily act of disconnecting from yourself. Because the human mind was never meant to constantly perform. Yet, over time, many people build versions of themselves designed for survival. The agreeable one, the calm one, the humorous one, the strong one. The version that avoids conflict and keeps things stable. Slowly, this performance becomes automatic. You stop questioning whether your reactions are genuine. You stop noticing why certain people make you feel smaller. You stop recognizing how much energy disappears in certain environments. Until eventually, your body begins to register what your mind has been ignoring. And that's where the exhaustion begins. Not in effort, but in fragmentation. As life progresses, expectations multiply. Society shapes you. Relationships condition you. Certain behaviors are rewarded, others quietly discouraged. Over time, you become socially functional, but internally divided. And that division is costly. It's like holding together two separate identities at once, the one you show and the one you hide. The emotions you allow, and the ones you bury before they can surface. The thoughts you express, and the ones you silence before they're even fully formed. That tension doesn't disappear. It lingers beneath everything, like a constant hum. People often label it as stress, but sometimes it's something deeper. Sometimes it's grief. The quiet grief of no longer recognizing yourself. This is why certain social situations leave you drained, even when nothing obviously negative happens. The mind is constantly calculating. Who can you be here? What parts of yourself need to stay hidden? What tone is acceptable? Which opinions are safe? All of this runs automatically, and it consumes energy, especially when it never turns off. Human beings are naturally adaptive. To maintain harmony, many people unconsciously shrink themselves. They soften their intelligence, tone down their ambition, filter their honesty, and hide their intensity. Not because they lack strength, but because adaptation helps them belong. The problem begins when that adaptation becomes permanent, because over time, the mask stops protecting you. It starts draining you. And what makes this more unsettling is that most people don't realize how exhausted they truly are until they experience a moment of not pretending. There's a distinct shift that happens when someone finally spends enough time alone. At first, there's relief, then discomfort, and then a different kind of noise emerges. Not external, but internal. Thoughts that have been avoided for years begin to surface. Regret, anger, envy, resentment, old memories, unresolved emotions. This is why silence can feel more uncomfortable than chaos. Chaos distracts. Silence reveals. Within the human mind, there are parts that remain hidden beneath the surface. Not erased, not destroyed, just pushed out of awareness. And suppressing these parts requires constant effort. When someone suppresses anger, it doesn't disappear. It divides them internally. When envy is denied, it turns into quiet dishonesty. When ambition is buried, it often transforms into resentment. The mind keeps track, even when nothing is spoken out loud. That's why this kind of exhaustion often feels emotional before it becomes physical. You can sense a tension within yourself, like different parts pulling in opposite directions. One part seeks peace, while another holds on to unresolved hurt. One part desires connection, while another struggles to trust. Both sides exist at the same time. Many people spend years trying to eliminate one side completely. They try to become entirely calm, entirely good, entirely controlled. But that creates an illusion, because the parts you reject don't disappear. They wait, and eventually, they find indirect ways to express themselves through passive aggression, sudden emotional reactions, emotional distance, or quiet bitterness. Emotional numbness often follows. The exhausted mind is usually a mind fighting itself in silence. And modern social life quietly intensifies this because performance is rewarded far more than authenticity. Over time, people learn which versions of themselves are accepted. The agreeable version is welcomed. The emotionally controlled version is admired. The useful version is valued. But the real self is rarely that simple. It's layered, contradictory, sometimes uncomfortable. Beneath politeness, most people carry traces of aggression, insecurity, a need for validation, fear of being irrelevant, even a quiet desire for control. The difference isn't who has these traits, it's who is aware of them. When a person remains unaware of their darker impulses, those impulses don't disappear. They operate in the background. That's why someone who appears endlessly kind can suddenly become harsh when pushed too far. Their identity depends on seeing themselves as good, so when suppressed emotions finally surface, they do so intensely. What was hidden for too long doesn't come out gently. Kindness without boundaries slowly teaches others how to take advantage of you. And many exhausted people don't even realize why they feel drained, because they've spent years suppressing instincts that don't need to be silenced, they need to be acknowledged. There's a difference. Wholeness isn't about becoming flawless. It's about becoming aware of everything within you, including the parts that feel uncomfortable to admit. That awareness begins to shift your relationship with yourself. Your reactions start making sense. You begin to see that your exhaustion isn't weakness, it's friction. Internal friction created by trying to live as someone who keeps rejecting parts of their own reality. And once that awareness begins, something else becomes harder to ignore. Many social relationships are built not on truth, but on quiet, mutual performance. You start noticing conversations where no one says what they actually mean. Friendships that continue out of obligation rather than connection. Relationships held together by fear of loneliness instead of genuine understanding. People aren't always interacting with each other. They're interacting with edited versions of one another, and maintaining those edits requires energy. That's why some gatherings leave you feeling drained, even if everything seemed fine on the surface. There was laughter, there were smiles, but underneath, your mind was constantly monitoring itself. Don't say too much. Don't reveal that thought. Don't appear too emotional. Don't seem arrogant. Don't seem weak. Don't disrupt the atmosphere. A silent negotiation runs in the background of every interaction. Eventually, the nervous system starts treating ordinary socializing like work. This is where many people confuse exhaustion with introversion, but sometimes it's not people themselves that drain you, it's the need to perform. Because around the right people, something shifts naturally. Your body relaxes, your thoughts slow down, you stop rehearsing what to say. Silence no longer feels uncomfortable. The exhaustion fades, not because you're alone, but because you're no longer pretending. The problem is, those spaces are rare. Most social environments subtly discourage authenticity, especially when it disrupts existing dynamics. People can often tolerate your pain more easily than your growth. They may support your healing until it begins to change how you relate to them. Then resistance appears, quietly, almost invisibly. Your boundaries start to feel cold to them. Your independence seems distant. Your honesty feels sharp. Your ambition appears selfish. Not necessarily because you've changed negatively, but because every social group develops an unspoken balance. Everyone falls into roles: the helper, the listener, the fragile one, the achiever, the dependable one. And when someone begins to step outside their assigned role, the system resists. Even unhealthy systems try to preserve themselves. Most relationships don't end the moment respect fades. They end when awareness enters, and the exhausted mind often begins waking up to these hidden patterns slowly. First comes irritation, then emotional distance, then confusion. Why do some people only reach out when they need something? Why do certain conversations leave you feeling heavy long after they end? Why do you feel more alone with certain people than when you're by yourself? Your body notices these imbalances before your mind fully accepts them. That's why exhaustion can become a signal, not a flaw. A signal that your inner world and your outer life are no longer aligned. When something inside has been ignored for too long, it doesn't stay quiet forever. The mind becomes louder. Anxiety increases. Numbness deepens. The exhaustion spreads. Not because something is broken, but because something buried is trying to come to the surface. And what rises first isn't always easy to face. Sometimes it's anger toward people you believed you had already forgiven. Sometimes it's grief for the years spent trying to be acceptable. Sometimes it's the unsettling realization that your personality was shaped more by survival than by truth, and that realization doesn't change you loudly, it changes you quietly. After that, something begins to shift. The need for constant approval slowly loosens its grip. Not because a person becomes distant or unfeeling, but because they finally recognize the cost of needing permission just to be themselves. And when that need fades, the world around them doesn't stay the same. People begin to respond differently. Not always in obvious ways, but in small, noticeable shifts. A slight change in tone. A little less warmth. Comments that sound like jokes but carry an edge. A quiet tension that appears the moment you stop over-explaining yourself. This happens because many relationships are built on predictability. People feel comfortable when they can anticipate your reactions, when they know how far they can go, when they understand how to keep things stable. The endlessly agreeable person becomes easy to manage. The one who always pleases becomes useful. The insecure one becomes easy to influence. But awareness disrupts that pattern, and unpredictability makes people uneasy, especially those who benefited from your lack of boundaries. There's an uncomfortable truth hidden in human behavior. People are not only drawn to love and connection, they are also drawn, often unconsciously, to control, status, and emotional security, even within close relationships. This doesn't make people evil, but it does make relationships more complex than we like to admit. A friend can genuinely care about you while quietly resenting your growth. A parent can love you deeply while subtly discouraging your independence. A partner can crave closeness while feeling threatened by who you become when you are fully confident. Human emotions don't exist in clean categories. They overlap, contradict, and collide. And the exhausted mind often belongs to someone trying to simplify a reality that is anything but simple. That's why people who become more emotionally aware often grow quieter over time. Not because they have less to say, but because they start seeing what lies beneath the surface. Compliments that feel like subtle competition. Concern that carries control. Advice that reflects projection more than understanding. As perception sharpens, social life can start to feel heavier. You begin noticing the quiet dynamics of power in everyday interactions. Who dominates conversations? Who seeks validation? Who subtly puts others down to protect their own ego? Who appears confident while hiding something fragile underneath? And the most unsettling realization is this: you're not separate from it. You've done it too, in your own ways. That's where self-awareness becomes uncomfortable, because it's not just about recognizing darkness in others. It's about facing it within yourself without turning away. Most people can admit to flaws that don't threaten their self-image, but very few can calmly face the parts of themselves capable of jealousy, manipulation, or ego-driven behavior. Ignoring those parts doesn't remove them. It gives them more control. The person who insists they are never selfish becomes blind to their own selfishness. The one who prides themselves on kindness may quietly accumulate resentment until it leaks out in indirect ways. The one who fears weakness may become controlling simply to avoid feeling vulnerable. The mind protects identity before it protects truth, and that's why self-awareness can feel painful. Every new realization challenges the story you've built about who you are. As that collision between identity and reality begins, exhaustion changes. It's no longer just tiredness. It becomes something deeper, almost existential. You start noticing yourself in real time, catching the artificial tone in your voice, recognizing rehearsed reactions, sensing when you're being polite instead of honest. For the first time, you see the mask while you're still wearing it, and once you see it, you can't fully go back. From that point on, the questions begin to surface. Quiet at first, then persistent. Who are you without the performance? Which parts of you are real and which were shaped by fear? How much of your personality was built to avoid rejection? How many of your beliefs are actually inherited fears? Most people don't sit with these questions for long. They escape into distractions, entertainment, work, constant noise, relationships, anything that fills the silence. Not because distraction is satisfying, but because stillness becomes uncomfortable once awareness begins. When you've spent years focused on maintaining an outer image, turning inward can feel unfamiliar, even unsettling. And eventually, something inside begins to push back. You lose interest in things that once kept you occupied. Conversations feel empty. Environments that once felt normal become difficult to tolerate. It can feel like something is wrong. Sometimes it is, but sometimes it's the beginning of honesty. A moment where something deeper refuses to keep participating in what no longer feels real. That's why this phase often feels lonely before it feels freeing. Awareness creates distance, not just from others, but from the versions of yourself that once fit in those spaces. You stop laughing at things that no longer resonate. You stop tolerating behavior that once seemed acceptable. You stop shrinking just to keep relationships intact. And naturally, things begin to change. Some people drift away without conflict. Others react with irritation you didn't expect. Some try to pull you back into who you used to be, because your growth quietly forces them to confront what they've avoided in themselves. They may not say it directly. Instead, they tell you that you've changed, as if staying exactly the same forever is some kind of maturity. But beneath that reaction, there's a quieter truth. The version of you that felt exhausted was often more convenient for others. Easier to predict, easier to influence, easier to keep emotionally available without giving much back. When awareness begins to shift that balance, tension naturally follows. Because now you start seeing something that's difficult to ignore. Many people don't relate to who you truly are. They relate to the role you play in their emotional world. The supportive one, the listener, the fixer, the one who forgives, who stabilizes, who absorbs. And the moment you stop performing that role consistently, people reveal how conditional their understanding really was. That realization alone can drain someone for a long time, because suddenly, every interaction carries a quiet question beneath it. Are they seeing me, or just the version of me that benefits them? Someone who isn't aware can avoid that question entirely. But once you become conscious of it, there's no easy way to ignore it again. That's why awareness feels like both freedom and weight. First, the illusion breaks. Then the sense of certainty goes with it. And underneath that, something more uncomfortable begins to surface. The realization that people are driven far more by fear, insecurity, and the need for validation than by logic or clear intention. Most people aren't malicious, but many are unaware, and unaware behavior can still leave a deep impact. Not because it's intentionally harmful, but because it repeats itself endlessly without reflection. You begin to notice patterns more clearly. The person who constantly criticizes others may be avoiding their own dissatisfaction. The one obsessed with appearing strong may be hiding a fear of insignificance. The emotionally distant person may not lack feeling. They may simply fear vulnerability more than they fear loneliness. Once you start seeing these patterns, interactions stop feeling random. You notice repetition everywhere. People recreating old wounds in new relationships, seeking approval from those who cannot genuinely offer it, choosing familiar discomfort over unfamiliar peace. And perhaps the hardest realization is this: many people would rather remain in predictable pain than face the responsibility of self-awareness. Because once you see your own patterns clearly, you can no longer place all the responsibility outside yourself. You begin to notice your own role, your silence, your avoidance, your dependence on approval, your attraction to unhealthy dynamics, your fear of losing people disguised as loyalty. This kind of inner work sounds almost poetic from a distance, but when it becomes personal, it can feel overwhelming. You begin uncovering parts of yourself you spent years avoiding. You realize that some of your kindness came from fear, some of your patience came from suppression, some of your goodness was shaped more by wanting to be accepted than by genuine intention. For a while, this awareness can feel even more exhausting than before, because illusions are efficient. They allow you to function without questioning too much. Truth, on the other hand, requires energy. Facing reality all at once can feel like a sudden weight, but something important begins to change within that process. Your exhaustion becomes clearer. Before, it felt scattered and confusing. Now it becomes more specific, more honest. You start recognizing exactly what drains you, which people leave you feeling empty, which environments force you to perform, which conversations require you to shrink yourself, which habits numb you temporarily but deepen the emptiness afterward. The fog begins to lift. And with that clarity, another realization appears. Mental exhaustion is not always weakness. Sometimes it's a signal that your mind can no longer tolerate living in contradiction with itself. Some people go their entire lives disconnected from who they are and never notice. They remain socially acceptable, emotionally distracted, and psychologically asleep. But others reach a point where something inside refuses to cooperate anymore. Energy drops, emotions flatten, motivation disappears. Not because life has ended, but because the identity they've been carrying can no longer support the weight of reality. And strangely, that collapse can become a beginning, a shift toward something more whole. But wholeness isn't as comforting as people imagine. It doesn't make you endlessly calm or permanently at peace. It makes you aware, and awareness changes how you see everything. You stop idealizing people so easily. You stop expecting consistent fairness from those who are still struggling internally. You stop mistaking attention for care or politeness for genuine goodness. You begin to see people, including yourself, as complex, conflicted, and often uncertain. And that leads to a deeper kind of honesty. Not about being perfect, but about recognizing what's actually there. The need for validation, the influence of ego, the presence of envy, pride, insecurity, the desire for control, the fear of abandonment, the longing to feel significant. These are not rare traits. They are human ones. What changes is not their existence, but your relationship with them. As the internal conflict begins to slow, something shifts. Not because everything inside you becomes light, but because you stop spending energy pretending certain parts don't exist. And that changes how you move through the world. And when that awareness stabilizes, something unexpected begins to happen. Eventually, something begins to settle. Silence no longer feels empty, and being alone no longer feels threatening. For the first time, you're not constantly trying to escape your own thoughts. And in that shift, the exhaustion starts to ease, not disappear completely, but soften. Because awareness doesn't remove tension from the human mind. It changes your relationship with it. You begin to understand that contradiction is not a flaw. It's part of being human. You can feel strength and fear at the same time. Love and resentment, compassion and selfishness. These opposites don't cancel each other out. They coexist. The goal was never to become perfectly pure. That idea itself creates more division. The real shift happens when you stop splitting yourself into acceptable and unacceptable parts, when you stop pushing certain emotions so far down that they begin shaping your life without your awareness. Because what you bury doesn't disappear, it waits. And over time, it influences your reactions, your decisions, your relationships, quietly but consistently. Many people spend years trying to appear stable while remaining disconnected from who they actually are, and that internal distance creates a specific kind of exhaustion, not dramatic, not obvious, quiet, persistent, the kind that slowly drains meaning from things that once felt alive, the kind that makes you feel strangely empty even in a room full of people. The kind that keeps you awake at night, wondering why everything feels heavy when nothing seems obviously wrong. That feeling isn't random. It's not weakness. It's a signal. A signal that some part of you is tired of pretending, tired of suppressing, tired of holding together an identity that no longer feels true. Because the mind can endure a lot. It can handle pressure, loss, even chaos. But what it struggles to endure is disconnection from itself. Becoming a stranger to your own thoughts, your own feelings, your own nature, that's where the real weight begins to build. And eventually, something inside stops cooperating. Not as punishment, but as a kind of correction. That's when awareness begins to change how you see everything. You stop idealizing people so easily. You stop expecting consistent fairness from those who are still driven by their own fears. You stop confusing attention with care or politeness with genuine intention. You start seeing people, including yourself, more clearly, not as perfect or broken, but as complex, often conflicted, trying to protect fragile parts of themselves while still figuring things out. And that clarity brings a different kind of responsibility, the ability to look at your own mind without immediately turning away, to admit that you seek validation more than you thought. That ego influences more of your decisions than you realized. That emotions like envy, insecurity, or the need for control aren't rare. They're human. What changes is not their presence, but your honesty about them. And slowly, the internal struggle begins to quiet down. Not because those parts disappear, but because you stop fighting them as if they shouldn't exist. You stop wasting energy denying what's already there. That shift changes how you move through life. You become less reactive, less dependent on approval, less easily shaped by pressure. Not distant, just grounded. You start noticing things more clearly. When someone is trying to provoke insecurity, when guilt is being used to influence you, when praise feels conditional instead of genuine, and most importantly, when you're about to abandon yourself just to remain acceptable to someone else. And as that awareness becomes steady, something unexpected happens. You feel more at ease in your own presence. Solitude becomes a space of clarity instead of discomfort. Silence becomes something you can sit with instead of something you need to escape. Not because everything inside you is resolved, but because you're no longer running from it. The exhaustion doesn't vanish completely. It changes. It becomes lighter, more honest, less confusing. Because the real goal was never perfection. It was integration. To stop living as divided fragments and begin existing as a whole, complex, imperfect, but real. And when that begins, even quietly, life starts to feel different, not easier, but truer. So maybe the question isn't whether you feel exhausted. Maybe the real question is, what part of yourself have you been carrying in silence for so long that it no longer feels like you at all? And maybe that's where we leave this. Not with a perfect conclusion, not with a clean answer, but with a moment of honesty. Because the truth is, this kind of awareness doesn't give you instant peace. It gives you clarity. And clarity changes everything. Quietly, permanently. You start seeing yourself without the filters. You start noticing where you've been performing, where you've been shrinking, where you've been holding on to versions of yourself that no longer fit. And that realization can feel heavy. But it's also where something real begins. Because the moment you stop running from yourself, even a little, the exhaustion starts losing its grip. So if something in this resonated with you, don't rush to fix it. Just notice it. Sit with it. Let it speak without immediately trying to silence it again. If this made you think a little deeper, stay with that feeling. There's more to uncover, and we'll explore it together. Until next time.